the Agorist Next podcast. I'm Brandon. I've got my great co-host Dag with me. How you doing, Dag?
Excellent, man. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. Before we get started with the great Jeremiah Harding, there's one thing that I did want to say, and that was that we are looking for sponsorship, that we are looking for subscribe star members. We're looking for anybody who can support us, and we really need the funds right now. And, this is a time to get in on the ground floor. We've never really had any major sponsors. We have had one that sponsored one of our podcasts a while ago, which is Love Java. So shout out to them. But other than that, we really haven't had any sponsors or anything. Like this is, and if you want to be involved, if you want to help us out, if you want to get to know us, we'll never forget the people that were there that got in on the ground floor. So with that said, we've got Jeremiah. We wanted to bring in Jeremiah Harding today to talk about Mockingbird. We thought he would be a great guest to have on to talk about Mockingbird. Since we have mentioned it in previous podcasts, Operation Mockingbird is very significant due to all of the media and the brainwashing that we received today. So without further ado, Jeremiah, how you doing?
Reasonable, you?
Pretty good. Great to have you on. Can you start out with how Mockingbird got created?
Okay, well, I think because, first I want to be very clear that I think Carl Bernstein did a better job in his article than I could do in an hour. So I would recommend that everybody, I'm assuming there's going to be a link in the description to his article. I would recommend that everybody who wants to know more, check that out. He wrote the article on Mockingbird initially. Second, I wanted to make the point that when you're looking for information on this, be very clear to say operation, because Project Mockingbird is, and I was going to bring this up, it's not like any sort of slight, but Project Mockingbird happened a little bit later, and it was also ironically about the suppression of journalism. So effectively, the CIA has a really common tactic, and I learned about it at first from a global research article, Institute for the Research on Globalization. I think that's what the full thing it is, but it's globalresearch.ca. And the global research article that had this line in it blew a lot of shit wide open for me. So the line is that the CIA has story within a story distraction tactics. What they'll do is they'll lead you down like prefabricated, predetermined rabbit holes. They'll obfuscate certain keywords so that when you look them up, they query different results, or so that when people did research before the internet, so that they couldn't find it at all because all the information related to a certain thing was obscured beyond a pile of bullshit. And I think that because Operation Mockingbird had such significant implications for the way the government interfaced with the populace, I think the government wanted the operation itself to be concealed, so they chose another like essentially operation as well, and called it Project Mockingbird, in order to obfuscate people's leads. And I think that's real interesting. I mean, you should look into both, but Project Mockingbird was a lot less intense, and a lot less implications arose from it. So with that in mind, and also just to really drive the nail home into this coffin here, fuck Google and its stupid CIA-funded bullshit, because Google is equally guilty, and I'll be writing a piece as soon as this place gets more funding, hint, hint, on Google's relationship with the CIA and intelligence in general. Just like I wrote an article on Facebook's relationship with the CIA and intelligence funding in general, because they pissed me off pretty directly when they banned our Facebook page, and you can still like the new one, Agorist Nexus 2.0, until that's eventually censored as well. But like effectively, people said, oh, they're a private company. They're a private company. Well, no, they're fucking not. They're not a private company. And I wrote an article about why they're not a private company, because they took CIA money and accepted responsibilities for the US government in various capacities to be an arm of the state. They're not private, and they never were. Even as far back as being a university faucet, they relied on university records to get their initial thing. So, like, whether it be the Zuckerberg or the Winklevoss people, like, really, they haven't had an original thought in their life. This has always been about documenting people and databasing them. And whether intentionally or unintentionally, Facebook has become an arm of the state. And as a cynical asshole and a conspiracy theorist, I say intentionally. And I bring that up because when it comes to CIA funding and instructions, the CIA creates arms of the government, quote, outside the government. That way they have plausible deniability. They don't have to write anything down on official documents. They have all these people acting on their behalf, and they can get government policy done without government action. So I bring that up because the reason I'm bringing, like, the reason Mockingbird is a thing is because of CIA funding and operations, management of, like, allegedly private people. I don't call them private anymore at that point. I call them public stooges. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the environment surrounding Mockingbird at the time it started. Alan Dulles was a monster, an incredibly fucked up bastard of a human, and he was the CIA director at the time. To be clear, I want people to read an Intercept article called The Devil's Chessboard, which advertises a book they should also read, but generally goes into certain things behind the idea for it, including the fact that Dulles was an elitist who said, quote, democracy only works if the so-called intelligent people make it work. You can't sit back and let democracy run itself. That should tell you every fucking thing you need to know about Alan Dulles. So, the guy was an absolute cretin. He boosted and supported the Nazis in World War II. He was a lawyer for Germans. He advocated for a brutal monster of an SS officer. And let me just, I'll read this part to you. This article is on The Intercept. It's by John Schwartz, and it goes into some good detail on who Dulles was. And the general idea of this article is to describe the deep state in a way that Trump people probably don't want people to know. He says, by this point, these events are fairly well known. Perhaps most compelling is Talbot's in-depth look at Dulles' lesser-known yet still extraordinary sordid projects. As the Swiss director of the Office of Strategic Services during World War II, Dulles, whose law firm had represented German corporations and many U.S. corporations with German interests, quietly attempted to undermine FDR's demand that Germany surrender unconditionally, going so far as to order the rescue of an SS general, surrounded by Schutzstaffel, by the way, surrounded by Italian partisans. Dulles also led the push to save Reinhard Gehlen, Nazi head of intelligence on the Eastern Front and a genuine monster from any post-war justice. Dulles then made certain Gehlen and his spies received a cozy embrace from the CIA and helped push him onto the top of West Germany's Federal Intelligence Service. And it then goes into how he sent a guy named Jesus de Galindez, a lecturer at Columbia University, to Rafael Trujillo, a Dominican Republic dictator, because the guy was saying things he didn't like. Trujillo then had Galindez, whose exposés of corruption Trujillo feared, boiled alive and fed to sharks, and ordered the murder of the American pilot who'd flown Galindez there. So not only did he kill Galindez, but he killed the guy who flew him there so nobody could fucking talk about it. And this guy became the head of the CIA. Okay? Sorry, this guy was the head of the CIA at that time, but he has Nazi sympathies, had anyway, and he boosted U.S. Imperial agendas by having anybody he wanted killed. And And that's just one example. There's tons of examples that probably got burnt up, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So there's that element of it. He oversaw the MK programs, that being Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird. They love their birds. Project, those things. MK Ultra, MK Search, like a variety of CIA mind control programs directly designed to basically spy versus spy what they expected to be Russian mind control programs, like counterintelligence, basically. And he also oversaw COINTELPRO operations from the inception to when they officially called them that. And one of those COINTEL programs was the one that I was requested to talk about. But he was involved in the assassination of JFK when JFK stopped sucking CIA cock. He was the inspiration behind the actual Manchurian Candidate. And just to add a little cherry on fucking top, now revelations are out that Charles Manson was an MK subject. So if anyone needed an evidence that Alan Dulles is a terrible person, what I would advise they do is look into MK programs and all the things surrounding him and his stupid Nazi ass. And especially if you have 4 hours someday, watch The Minds of Men from True Stream Media. I've told so many people to do that, but few people have. And find out how horrible and awful these experiments were and what they were designed to do, which is mind control, which is reprogramming. So with all that in mind, it should be no fucking surprise that this fucking Nazi cunt wanted a program to control the media, because part of the core Nazi ethic is the discrediting of the Lügenpresse, the lying media, which should sound familiar to certain people who've heard certain presidents. But the general idea is that if you can control the media, then you can control the way people think. Now, the first thing I want to do, and do you have any questions?
No, man, you're covering it pretty well.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, good.
All right, so this Alan Dulles cunt oversees the operation. The quote news affected, and I'm not going to list them all because there are so many that were affected that are just related to this.
I'm sorry. Actually, what time period are we talking about? Are we talking about the 50s, the 60s?
50s and 60s.
Okay.
So it started in it started in the 50s, and it translated into the 60s, and then eventually the Ramparts piece came out in 72, I think it was. So basically, Operation Mockingbird, because I should actually say what it was before I get into that. I'm ahead of myself as usual. Got too much caffeine in my system, which reminds me, I'm gonna have a sip of tea here. So what it is well, and I say is because I think it's still going on, but they claim, oh, we shut it down. I don't believe them for a second. These are, as ministry would call them, these are thieves and liars, hypocrites and bastards, murderers. These, you don't trust these people. But assuming it was shut down, let me just say it was an alleged large-scale program, as Wikipedia puts it, of the United States Central Intelligence Agency that began in the early years of the Cold War and attempted to manipulate news media for propaganda purposes. So that's the general idea. What it would do is it would send not only money, but select intelligence to media outlets, and also student organizations. And it would also threaten journalists with if you expose what we're doing, we'll shut you down, we'll have you killed, said things like that. And they would also threaten journalists who had anything, who weren't who never accepted their money, to keep them hush about things that controlled media wouldn't talk about to begin with. So they had to keep people hush. It was all big jackbooty kind of bullshit. So the news affected was a wide variety of publications. And I'm going to list the ones that Carl Bernstein references: Time, Life, New York Times, The Washington Post, Washington Star, Miami News, Louisville. I gotta be specific because I'm gonna have some Southerners angry with me if I don't. Louisville Courier Journal, Copley News Services, Christian Science Monitor, Reuters, New York Herald Tribune, Hearst Newspapers, United Press International, Mutual Broadcasting System, and more. So that should give you an idea of how far-reaching this is. Now, the purposes of the purpose of Operation Mockingbird itself was like basically in the name. You would release your controlled information, and your news people would parrot that information, and then other people would parrot those news sources as sources. Because if you just said the CIA said it, then people might not believe it. But if you say, well, these press institutions said it, then people might fucking suck the cock down. So that's the general idea, right? Is you get people on board who have some sort of existing reputation. You get their reputation behind your words, even though it's entirely controlled opposition, if it is opposition at all, and is most of the time just co-signing your agenda, right? So the general idea is that you get people of positive repute, like these long-standing institutions I listed, and you get them to be the originator of government claims. And then other people parrot those government claims. They become Mockingbird. They just repeat what they're told. And then everybody else Mockingbirds that, and it repeats and it repeats and it repeats. And if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. So the Vox Populi eventually accepts certain things as true. And it was all done to control the allegedly anti-freedom communist menace. And I say it that way because I don't know what's more anti-freedom than controlling people's minds through indirect means, and sometimes very overt means via MK Ultra projects. I think Alan Dulles talking about freedom at all is an absolute laugh fucking riot. But the general idea was to control communist narratives and prevent the red threat from having its hooks in American psychology, by getting people to parrot what they were told. You were going to ask me something?
I was just going to say, man, it's for people's own good. The like you mentioned earlier with Dulles, I'd read this in Bernays. He was saying the intelligent few have to be the ones to, guide democracy, in the right directions there. It's funny, a lot of times people think like, oh, propaganda is supposed to be to like sway people towards a certain thing. But, like you're saying here, it's almost like they just want to repeat the regular narrative. So people who are typically on board anyhow, they just know what to say. They just repeat what they hear, and it goes on from there. And then it's any cognitive dissonance if you try to tell them otherwise.
Right. So I'm going to read just a segment of Bernstein's article. I think it's a good one in general, but I'm going to read a segment about the kinds of people that they would try to influence. Stringers and freelancers. Most were payrolled by the agency under standard contractual terms. Their journalistic credentials were often supplied by cooperating news organizations. Some filed news stories, others reported only for the CIA. On some occasions, news organizations were not informed by the CIA that their stringers were also working for the agency. Employees of so-called CIA proprietaries. During the past 25 years, the agency has secretly, and this was written in the 70s, by the way, just to place that, because the past 25 years was like when Carl Bernstein wrote this. The agency has secretly bankrolled numerous foreign press services, periodicals, and newspapers, both English and foreign language, which provided excellent cover for CIA operatives. One such publication was the Rome Daily American, 40% of which was owned by the CIA until the 1970s. The Daily American went out of business this year. Editors, publishers, and broadcast network executives. The CIA's relationship with most news executives differed fundamentally from those with working reporters and stringers, who were much more subject to direction from the agencies. Sorry, from the agency. A few, that's with a capital A, by the way. A few executives, Arthur Hayes Sulzberger of the New York Times among them, signed secrecy agreements, but such formal understandings were rare. Relationships between agency officials and media executives were usually social. The P and Q Street axis in Georgetown, said one source. You don't tell Willard Parley to sign a piece of paper saying he won't think. Like rat, snitch for people who need like modern parlance. So he then goes on to say, columnists and commentators. There are perhaps a dozen well-known columnists and broadcast commentators whose relationships with the CIA go far beyond those normally maintained between reporters and their sources. They are referred to at the agency as known assets and can be counted on to perform a variety of undercover tasks. They are considered receptive to the agency's point of view on various subjects. Three of the most widely read columnists who maintain such ties with the agency are C.L. Sulzberger of the New York Times, Joseph Alsop, and the late Stuart Alsop, whose column appeared in the New York Herald Tribune, the Saturday Evening Post, and Newsweek. CIA files contain reports of specific tasks all three undertook. Sulzberger is still regarded as an active asset by the agency. According to a senior CIA official, young Cy Sulzberger had some uses. He signed a secrecy agreement because we gave him classified information. There was sharing, give and take. We'd say, we'd like to know this. If we tell you this, will it help you get access to so-and-so? Because of his access in Europe, he had an open sesame. We'd ask him to just report, what did so-and-so say and what did he look like? Is he healthy? He was very eager. He loved to cooperate. End quote. On one occasion, according to several CIA officials, Sulzberger was given a briefing paper by the agency, which ran almost verbatim under the columnist's byline in the Times. Saikame out and said, I'm thinking of doing a piece. Can you give me some background? A CIA officer said. We gave it to Cy as a background piece, and Cy gave it to the printers and put his name on it. Sulzberger denies that any such incident occurred. A lot of baloney, he said. So that's as much as I'm going to read from this piece. I think ultimately people should read this piece. It's fucking long, and it's good. It's information dense, but it also goes into some of the training that these journalists underwent. The fact that some of them were journalists already, but some of them were just planted by the CIA. The fact that a lot of news bylines were just run with like that kind of thing where they just put their name on it, but it was created by the CIA, effectively a press release for select members of the press who would do the bidding of the deep state. And that's the general notion. So like basically you could control entire newspapers by controlling the core messages certain trusted employees were sending. And by doing so, and by manipulating the public's acceptance of their credibility, you could turn an entire paper into your, anti-communist platform for pro-American values and the good old American way, and bullshit like that. Basically the terror threat before the terror threat was the terror threat. Before the U.S. government funded it with the CIA through Operation Cyclone, but that's another subject. So that's the effective notion of the Mockingbird Press, is that you start with established media, you use it to your ends, and anybody who dares come out against you is shuttered, which is what I'll be bringing up next. So, I mean, I'll keep going if you guys don't have anything.
Nah, man, you're rock and rolling.
Yeah, keep going.
All right. So, one institution which stopped accepting CIA money, they got a bad taste in their mouth of being lapdogs for some reason, was Ramparts. And I'm just going to read some first person perspective of that situation. I'll read fucking 3 paragraphs here. 4. Yeah, let's do that. In 1965, I was a Berkeley graduate student on track to become a tenured radical. Instead, I dropped out and joined an obscure liberal Catholic magazine called Ramparts, headquartered in the sleepy Bay Area suburb of Menlo Park. Now, I'm going to stop there just for a second because anybody who's read my article on Facebook knows about Menlo Park. You should know that that's basically the California area hub for a bunch of statist bullshit. And the CIA especially loves them some Menlo Park. So just look into CIA Menlo Park. Just like you can Google those 2 terms together and get a wealth of good information. But let me continue. A little more than a year later, I wrote a story exposing the CIA's secret penetration and financing of the National Student Association, NSA. The article helped catapult our now radical San Francisco-based monthly to national attention and to a catalytic role in the protest movements of the time. The mainstream press celebrated my leftist colleagues and me as heroes of American journalism. Rampart's rise to celebrity status seemed to herald a new era of the media's speaking truth to power. The reality was far less luminous, and Rampart's legacy, which a new book celebrates, was not a positive one for the country. I still remember the phone call I received one evening in February 1967 from an old classmate at the City College of New York. He had just picked up the next day's New York Times at a Manhattan newsstand and noticed a front-page picture of me and fellow Ramparts editors Warren Hinckley and Robert Scheer. "It's above the fold," my friend exulted, and then read out the headline on the accompanying article, quote, "Ramparts, gadfly to the establishment." The photograph, taken in Rampart's San Francisco office, was captioned, "Planning the next expose." There would be no more Ramparts exposés of CIA front groups. The media heavyweights now pursued the story far more effectively than our monthly magazine could have. Tom Wicker, the Times' prize-winning DC bureau chief, assembled a team of experienced reporters to follow the money trail from the CIA-connected foundations named in my Ramparts article. The Washington Post jumped in, recognize these names, by the way, with its own reporting team, turning up new connections almost every day. The newspapers described how legitimate tax-exempt foundations laundered millions of dollars from the CIA and passed the funds to an agency-designated list of civic and cultural groups, labor unions, magazines, and book publishers. It soon became clear that the CIA-NSA relationship, not no such agency, but the one that I listed already, was just one thread in an elaborate web of citizen front groups, secretly supported and sometimes even created by the spy agency in the early days of the Cold War. Other beneficiaries of CIA largesse were highbrow magazines like The New Leader and Encounter, the international operations arm of the American Federation of Labor, and the American and European sections of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the anti-communist organization founded in 1949 by public intellectuals such as Arthur Koestler, Sidney Hook, and Arthur Schlesinger Jr. The top secret project had been approved at the highest levels of the U.S. government. So basically, this article details what they do to publications that don't play ball, and it's a really compelling article because basically it goes off the fact that that one they became tools of the state on their own, and then everybody else got to write stories about it because they were tools of the state already. So basically, they became anti-Black Panthers people, and he says he felt partly responsible for creating the myth of the Black Panthers, righteous rebels fighting off brutal police oppression. In 1967, I wrote a hagiographic profile for Ramparts of Huey Newton, the Panthers' Ministries of Defense, and then published basically the same article in the New York Times magazine. Yet another indication of the changes in the mainstream media. So I think people should read this article. And like he asks questions, weren't we supposed to be the new left as opposed to communist tyranny as we were to US imperialism? So basically he goes over the fact that they were slowly eroded by the powers that be, and effectively became a tool of the establishment, exactly like that headline read. So I would advise people read that one. I would advise people read Bernstein's article, but generally that's the idea, right? Because Ramparts started to lose accuracy, and it would start to be like relevant, but only relevant in the context of repeating stuff, and evidence of the CIA's effect on journalism itself. So I think it's a reasonable thing to suspect that this is still going on, but I also have some stuff to discuss in that regard that is guaranteed, that is happening with regards to the CIA and U.S. government still manipulating media. It's just not nonfiction media, but I 100% guarantee you that this is still going on. It was allegedly shut down, and it was allegedly like sort of scuttled, right? But like all you have to do is look into the CIA to know that they can hide things pretty effectively, and then all they need is some black budget money to go missing. Black budget money like that $2.3 trillion that got lost in the so-called not inside job of 9/11. The black budget money that went to the Homan Square detention facility, or the black budget money that went to various other sorts of like black sites where people were like held and tortured, and the war on terror. So CIA black money is really easy to generate, really easy to hide. I don't think it stopped, especially since a lot of the media just parrots bullshit anyway. Like, it's very dangerous to our democracy line that was popular not too long ago, because people realized everybody was reading from a press release. Now, people like me, I found out about press releases many years before that, because I was working with somebody, and I'm not going to mention who they were, that wrote press releases for a living, and she told me all about this thing. That press releases were basically just you write your thing and other people parrot it, and then that thing becomes the news. So basically, people who write press releases can write the news if they can get newspapers to accept their release. And the CIA was doing that, like lock, stock, and barrel. Like the whole deal was. So those stories that were just written by the CIA, where Bernstein went over the fact that that Sulzberger just like got articles and wrote his name on them. That should tell you everything you need to know about this, because like so many other people probably got similar shit and just didn't talk about it later, and it just wasn't revealed. And to be very specific, the Church Committee, which was convened after Watergate, related to the CIA's shady dealings, that only got a fraction of the programs, because a lot of documents were destroyed. They burned a lot of documents. They shredded shit. They got rid of a lot of things that might trace back programs. Even the MK programs, we don't know as much about those as we could, because they destroyed a lot of it. And what they didn't destroy, they redacted. So we can't figure out shit from those pages, except a certain like cluster of lurid details about the programs. There's probably more operations in the media. There's probably more operations in corporations in general, and we just don't know about it because they were destroyed before the Church Committee. And there's lots of information about the Church Committee specifically in Bernstein's article, so I recommend people read that. Can't stress that enough. But the general idea is, I don't think it's over. I think it's still going on, because there's a lot of demonstrably parroted and repeated shit that directly benefits the elites, and because they can guarantee that only their agenda will be pushed, because the current modus operandi for information dissemination is social media, and they have direct control over the major search engine, email system, and everything else in the form of Google. And they also have direct control over Facebook. And if they've got control over Google and Facebook, basically Twitter has to follow suit, or they'll be bumped away too. So I see this as evidence, like, since they would threaten, journalists who didn't do what they wanted. I see that as absolute evidence. There's no reason to believe them when they said, "Oh shucks, we learned our lesson. We won't do that no more."
Right. Yeah, I think it's bigger than ever. I mean, especially when you add in the internet and social media, fact checkers, all that.
Well, yeah, because Facebook fact checking is partially funneled through the Atlantic Council, which means effectively the UN, NATO bullshit, all these international organizations get to pick away at people's stories. So anything inconvenient to them gets to be called false, even if it's demonstrably true. Even certain things that have nothing to do with those articles will be marked false because they had a word in it and it triggered something. It's always funny to see a fact check below something that's totally unrelated to it because an automated system said, "Hey, it's got this word in it. You gotta fact check this thing. You gotta put this existent fact check on it." And it's really not fact checking. It's just narrative checking. They want to make sure that you're following the narrative, and if you're not, you don't get to say what you're saying, which is effectively the exact same thing as Operation Mockingbird fucking was to begin with. It's just, mutated. It's like a cancer, it's a new type of cancer cell, but it's still just cancer.
Yeah, they really have a lot of opportunity with social media, like not just to, have so much access to everybody, but, it's a big device to be able to categorize people, put people into groups and stuff. So it's also giving them a ton of data, about people, what sets them off, and this and that. And they have such the ability to control that too, I think that, I mean, of course, it's still going on. Like, I mean, it has to be. I think, but even back in like the post 9/11 days, there was a lot of the. It came out at one point that they were doing the exact same thing that you were saying they were doing back in the 60s and 70s. Whoever the government, the military folk would just be like, "Here's what's going on," and basically the news would just read it. Like, "Hey, this is what's happening," and now they just helped lie us into war.
Yeah.
I think they even had a video game that the government put out. It's like a military video game in order to try to entice people to join the army.
Well, okay, so if you want to talk fiction, right now at this point, and that's something I was going to bring up, you know how fictional shit, like they'll get all this high-tech equipment to film with, like they'll get Black Hawk helicopters, they'll get jets, they'll get aircraft carriers, they get all this shit, right? Well, they get that from the US government themselves, a lot of the time, and they get it from the US government themselves on loan. They'll give it back after they're done filming on it. And in order to get that loan, the US government's like, "Hey, yeah, you know what? We'll take your request here. Just let us look at your script." And so they'll show the script, they'll show what's in it, and ultimately, when they're showing the script and what's in it, they'll say like, "Oh, we really like this, but we don't like how you portrayed us here, and here, and maybe also here. Do you mind cutting those out or redoing them in some way that puts us in a more favorable light?" Or something similar to that. And they'll do that. And a great example of this is a movie that came out which directly involved the US government in many of its creation elements, was considered heavily almost documentarian in its advertising pre-release, in that they said, "Oh, well, we sought experts, we got experts, we were doing so well because we got all these people who knew what they were talking about. We directly involved the US government so that we got accuracy to the highest degree." And they got, quote, accuracy for the CIA's narrative that torture is good, that it's good that the US government is invading foreign lands and torturing people, because torture and invasion is what led to the capture of Osama bin Laden. And then we're supposed to watch that chick cry at the end and feel bad for her. I was shaking with rage most of that movie because I watched it knowing it was propaganda. I had already come into it with that in mind, and I totally legally got a file of it, and so that I could watch it totally legally, absolutely. And I just sat there and watched this propaganda film where, like, effectively the U.S. government had given them a lot of resources and a lot of one-to-one sorts of sets and like how things would have been done, and a lot of training on how torture was done so that they could do it properly in the movie, but also have some safety and shit like that, and directly just propagandizing to the American people that it's okay to torture people for information, that it's very effective, that it got the information she needed, and that they got bin Laden because of it. And then poor old woman got to cry in the fucking in the fucking troop transport afterward. You know,
Right.
so like I was shaking with rage by the end of it, because they didn't give anybody else's perspective. They didn't give any context. They didn't tell any stories relating to, hey, maybe we shouldn't be over there bombing people who had nothing to do with shit. And, you know, maybe this raid didn't even happen. We don't know. That's the thing. They chucked Osama bin Laden in the fucking ocean. We don't know. Like, in fiction, when you're a writer for fiction, there's a concept called show us the body. And if you haven't seen the body, you don't fucking know somebody died. So the idea that we're supposed to assume that bin Laden is dead because they say he died is some of the most overt propaganda I think the American people could possibly accept, especially since, like, the context surrounding his death was fucky, and so was 9/11. And anybody who wants to know about that can watch James Corbett's 9/11, a conspiracy theory video. It's like 5 minutes, not 4 hours. You can find out that whole situation was ass aids, and like it was 100% fabricated. They don't have bin Laden somewhere. And if you really want to dig some, you should dig into how his camp in Khost was funded, which was funded directly by, you guessed it, the CIA, back when he was called Tim Osman, Osman. And he had this camp in Khost, and they funded that through Operation Cyclone. So the alleged terror threat that the U.S. government has been fighting for decades, they fucking created. But we're supposed to be on their side about this shit, so they have to create whole fucking cloth narratives. And since people won't just believe them, since people won't just take their word for it, they need to go through, especially since the U.S. government has a sordid reputation for truth. They had to go through more reputable people. Well, who's more reputable? Existing journalists, people who have a name already, people who are under prestigious newspapers. There's a term for it. I was trying to unearth from my fucking info chasm, but I can't remember what the term is. But basically, you get people who are already part of prestigious outlets to repeat official narratives, and then you just, that's all you need. You don't need proof. You don't need jack shit. All you need is these people to repeat what you're saying, sometimes word for word, sometimes with no changes at fucking all, and then you suddenly get your narrative released. And then, like, a video I watched about this to brush up on the situation, specifically about the fact that the U.S. government has been directly responsible for propagandizing its people, had an interesting way of putting it. They needed to prove that they were still necessary after the Cold War was over, which makes total sense, you know? And that video was on Al Jazeera, which, you know, they're funded by a government too. So I'm not saying they're pure or innocent, but the video was good. The video was nice and descriptive, and I think the video did a good job. And that video is called Covert Operations: How the CIA Works with Hollywood. listening post feature. So if anybody wants to look that up, you can. That is, unless that's censored somehow because the people in government are fascists. So with all that in mind, I don't know how anybody can simply trust any mainstream narrative, especially if there's no corroborating sources, especially if there's no proof, especially if all they say is we have an anonymous source. So the fuck what? Your anonymous source could be Zbigniew Brzezinski's clone off to tell, well, Zbigniew, whatever. Fucking names are bullshit. You know, it could be his clone just back from the grave to tell us how the people to the north of the Middle East are the Middle East's enemies and Allah is on their side again. You know, I don't fucking, that's the thing. Once you start looking into this and you start realizing that so many things are either the story that the CIA wanted you to know or one of the other stories, the backup stories that they don't mind you finding too, story within a story distractionary tactics of spider web of rabbit trails for any aspiring conspiracy theorist to get lost in, a lot of their claims start to not ring so true. So yeah, I don't know. I'm rambling at this point.
I think I know the James Corbett video that you were talking about with the 9/11 thing, and that is just phenomenal. It's like the 5 minutes, and yeah, they go through all that. And I think he was even saying like after the Osama bin Laden thing, the guys who were on the SEAL team who did it, died in a helicopter crash or something. You know, it's just like it's almost like predictable. You know, like at this point, like once you start to see the patterns, this just almost gets to be predictable.
Yeah, we put our operations forward. We mop it up afterwards, and we clean the brains off the walls. That's it.
Yep, and then like I said, when there's no body, and that is, I never really put that together. But yeah, if you're watching like a movie or something fictional, and yeah, you don't see them die, they're not dead, like they're coming back.
Yeah, or at the very least, they have the potential to. There's the sequel potential, and then they can Sean Connery their way up, and like rumors of my death were greatly exaggerated. Fucking blah 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 blah.
Well, I had a couple questions, but I didn't know if you how much more, if you had any more narrative you wanted to go through, or if you wanted me to ask you a couple questions. So one thing that I always found kind of interesting, and I've read a little bit about, is the Iran coup in like the I think it was like 53 or something, and it almost seems like when a lot of this really started, at least, on record, started to really go down. Are you familiar with that situation? Basically put a lot of propaganda out there to help it out. And like the CIA did it really secretively. What they were paying like gangsters and newspaper people and politicians to like, run whatever they wanted in Iran's paper to start riots and, act like they're against the current administration and stuff. Do you think that ties in to maybe the beginning origins of Operation Mockingbird, or was that something different?
Well, it certainly did, because that's how they started to establish their foreign press credentials and shit like that. Because a lot of this would come through the foreign press, and wouldn't come directly through the American media. Because, like, for instance, just to be very specific, Operation Mockingbird had a bunch of people surrounding it, would directly manipulate the media, not by domestic means, but by filtering something through a foreign press. So like, if you look up a video called Operation Mockingbird CIA Media Control Program, you can hear somebody say that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country. Now we're looking at that very carefully. Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal? And they said, we do have people who submit pieces to other American journals. And so like there's that element of it. But they started to build that up with that coup, which is a thing you can find out about with an NPR piece on it, on a sort of documentary called Coup 53 about the backstory of the ouster of Mohammad Mossadegh. And the whole thing is very interesting, but like I can't really go too far into detail because my hour is almost up. But like I would recommend people start with that NPR thing, even though NPR is AIDS normally. Also look up the foreignpolicy.com article, because Foreign Policy is to this day one of my favorite magazines for foreign policy. It's entitled 64 Years Later, CIA Finally Releases Details of Iranian Coup. And if you look at it, it mirrors like pretty closely the tactics that they would later use. I think it's one of those things, sort of like how China became the test bed for a lot of American tyranny, how the like social credit score system and the digital money and the 5G surveillance state with facial recognition robocops with their smart glasses. Sort of like how I said all that was coming to the US and nobody believed me. And now it's basically here in Flint, Michigan, and to be rolled out wherever else will accept it. It's sort of like that. They did it as a test bed, in my opinion, for the same sort of thing that they would go on to later do in the US, like more broadly. Operation Ajax.
Yes, that's what it was called. Yeah, that whole thing is a really cool story with Iran and everything. And then, you know, some of the things that they were paying people to do were like start riots, vandalism, tear down statues, deface, you know, historical or government, you know, things. And it's just like, again, like it almost seems like something like that might be happening right now, you know?
Yeah, everywhere. The CIA is not gone. It's stronger than ever. It has more hooks in more places. The American people are directly salivating at what they do because they've controlled social media and the search engines, and then gotten us to believe that that's where you should get your information. Hey, internet, it's great. It's so great. You've got informational freedom. Well, no, actually, you don't. You've got a controlled narrative with controlled opposition, paid journalists, bribed politicians. It's just another place for corruption to happen. It's not like free or open. The free market has never existed. The closest you can get is the black market, and even that the state's got its gun pointed at. So the white market of journalism is pretty, when you start really looking into it, digging beneath that veneer, it gets pink and then it gets red real fucking quick.
Hell yeah. You got anything else, Brandon?
Oh, I think you covered it quite well. That's exactly why we wanted to have you on. Yeah, I think it's just crazy how everyone says, oh, you know, the CCP in China, you know, all media is controlled by the CCP in China, and you know, all this stuff. It's like, and then you say, well, it's the same way in the United States, and then they just go, no, those are private, you know, entities or whatever, and it's all a lie. I mean, yeah, all media is pretty much the same way in the U.S. as it is in China. It's more covertly done, and you know, it's just Soviet style, and they use Soviet style propaganda tactics too. So it's just you know, even just with the censorship of what is it, the FCC, just with that alone, them saying which radio stations can broadcast, you know, which which television companies can broadcast certain things. They pretty much, you know, and that's the government branch, so they control who can enter this so-called market of information and which can't. So that's kind of my 2 cents and rant on that. But
yeah, I mean, like we're not getting a TV station. Like they would not allow us, you know, to have a TV station. You know, thank goodness we're able to have, you know, this kind of platform, you know. But yeah, it's, I mean, when they have to give you permission to even enter the market, you know, there's nothing free about it.
Well, and like Frank Church, the guy in that video I was talking about, in the 70s, he said, I thought it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country. Yeah, that's exactly fucking it. You know?
A lot of people seem to take it more seriously when it comes from a foreign news source, I find.
Well, like I can't just say me. I can't just say I said it because I read the article from the Rolling Stone. I can't just say I said it read Bernstein's article on it. It's good. I have to say, oh, not only did I say it, but even Al Jazeera is saying it. Even Reuters agreed eventually that they were funded by the CIA. Even like all these people eventually owned up to it, and they're still considered credible news sources, even though they had direct conflicts of interests. And like when the Mockingbird media can come in and destroy your institution because you didn't toe the line the way they wanted it to, they wanted you to, like Ramparts did. You know, it's pretty telling. It's pretty fucking telling, because when you eventually end up with the idea that the only people who can say anything are the people saying things that you agree with, that's tyranny. That's fascism. It's what consolidated one of the best sort of industrial funk bands out there had to say. It's friendly fascism. You know, this is the new face of power in America. This is your future. You can never leave. Who said tyranny can't be fun? Friendly fascism. Yeah.
That's perfect. Jeremiah, thank you so much for being here tonight, man. This was great. You did way more knowledgeable than us on the subject. So we really want to do an episode about this kind of thing, and really glad you're able to come on and help us out.
Well, just keep in mind, audience, that I like scratched the surface here. You should read all the articles. There'll be, I think, links in the description. I'm sending all the information that I have to Dag and Brandon here. So all the information should be available. And like this is like introductory. This is like sort of tutorial range. It's not the full package. I would recommend starting with that Carl Bernstein article if you've ever got time to just sit there. And if you've got even more and longer time to realize how evil Alan Dulles was, just watch The Minds of Men and look into his Nazi bullshit, because he's Nazi bullshit. And the whole thing of like Operation Paperclip followed that relatively well, where, you know, the US government brought over scientists and a variety of other people from Nazi Germany to serve US interests. The Nazis, as I said on Twitter the other day, did not lose, they moved.
Yeah. Well, we got a bunch of their scientists.
Yeah.
All kinds of, but not to change the subject, but I think it's just crazy how there's so much information out there on Operation Mockingbird and the control of the media, or just anything. There's so much information out there, and yet when you try to tell anybody about anything, it's with sources, with links, whatever, it's, oh well, you're just a conspiracy theorist. And I think even that coined word, conspiracy theorist, was from the CIA, but also it's just like they're so heavily brainwashed, probably from media, in the first place, so that you can't even, offer up credible sources to them to show them, hey, like, there's this complete, control, and yeah, they're so brainwashed they just write it off and call you conspiracy theorists. So.
Well, right. And see, that's the thing. Like, even this was covered up for a while, and the church committee covered it up. Carl Bernstein's article is titled "The CIA and the Media: How America's Most Powerful News Media Worked Hand in Glove with the Central Intelligence Agency, and Why the Church Committee Covered It Up." It's all about not only the fact that it happened, but the fact that there was a massive cover-up about it, because even when the information came out, they didn't want anybody to know. They didn't want people to know that people like the New York Times were bought. That's the thing. That's why when somebody like Joe Rogan comes out and says that he primarily reads the New York Times, I'm like, oh, that explains a lot. Because he runs the mainstream narrative about a lot of things. And given the fact that the New York Times has a long-standing history of accepting, whatever the state wants to feed them because they like money more than they like principles, I think that says everything you need to know about anybody who says that they're their primary news source. Somebody tells you they primarily read the New York Times, I don't know, piss on them, feed them a shit sandwich. Doesn't fucking matter. Like, I like a lot of what Joe has to say, and maybe whatever, I just burned a bridge and I'll never get on his show, even if I do awesome things. But like, ultimately, the general idea should be like, get it from as many sources as possible. Don't just run with something. And you know, just to put a really fine point on it, let's talk about Nick Sandman, because all he had to do is be on video smiling and looking at somebody, and the entire fucking media jumped down his neck. You know, I was one of the people who wrote a piece on it before anybody sort of retracted their bullshit, and there are still people with tweets up threatening him over it because the media said something, and the media, which got used to repeating each other, not actually having anything original to say, but repeating each other, got used to it repeating each other enough that even when a kid was getting doxxed and threatened over shit that didn't happen, they still ran with their narrative, and they still kept that face up. And then they had the audacity to ask him if he felt sorry for anything during an interview. Like, he had nothing to be sorry for. And that's just one example. Like, that's just one example among countless others, right? So the media is a pack of liars, to a high degree. There are few people in the media that are not. And like, ultimately, the fact that something ran under a banner isn't evidence that it's true. You know, the fact that something had somebody's like journalistic integrity attached to it doesn't mean shit. What you need to do is you need to find it from as many sources as possible saying the same thing with evidence, not just they said, you know, not just this, because that's what it ends up doing. And like, that's the reason I caught so much shit not too long ago on Twitter for talking about the fact that Ryan Teeter, Benjamin Ryan Teeter, hadn't actually been proven to help Taliban people or to have wanted to help Taliban people, and that all we were doing was accepting a government informant's testimony in the indictment. That's all we were accepting. That's all people were passing around, is that somebody in government said that he said these things. No proof that anything actually happened, and no proof that that he did anything. Just them saying it happened. And all these media institutions came out with their dumb headlines saying Ryan Teeter was responsible, and he did all these things, and and he's also affiliated with far right white supremacist Boogaloo movement. You know, so like, it's the same thing done. Even if the CIA didn't pay them any money at all, it's the same thing done as was done before. The US government said something. That's all. No proof, no nothing. The US government said something. And then a bunch of media outlets who've been trained to repeat what the US government says, not question, not speak truth to power. Not a single mainstream outlet didn't report on that and just repeat what the fucking people told them to. So, yeah, it's still going on, even if it's not going on. Even if the CIA isn't doing this at all anymore, which fucking good luck proving that to me. The same effect still lingers, and that is a media that is a terrorist to the common person's sense of truth.
Well said. Do you have anything to add to that, Dag?
No, man, this has been great.
Cool. Well, give us some plugs. I know we got Jeremiah.com, right?
JeremiahHarding.com. Insanity is free pretty much everywhere. You can also find me on Twitch. I'm going to start doing game streams as well. So there's just a variety of places. You can probably just find me by my name and, you know, find all the people who hate me for one thing or another.
Cool. Well, I think that's our show. I'll end it with a quote like I usually do. But first, I want to say, you know, if you want to support Jeremiah, you can do so directly, but you can also do that through Agorist Nexus as well. I mean, we've got a lot of writers.
And you can read my long ass bullshit if you want, because I have multiple pieces and most of them don't actually get read. So I have multiple pieces on the COVID situation, talking about how basically it's being used as an excuse to engage fascism on home soil. And I also have a couple pieces on Facebook, one being about how Facebook is not in fact a private company, and another on more decentralized and free speechy alternatives to Facebook. Which one is best? Why I think that. Things like that. Articles on the economy collapsing. More recently, since the outlet got hit with censorship, shorter articles on various things. I got one up on TikTok. I got one up on Thomas Paine. So feel free to check those out. And if you do want to support the outlet, you will be supporting me and also all the other great authors there. Wendy McElroy, Lily Forrester, Agorist over here, and basically
Saul Mayweather, Graham Smith. I mean, we got
Yeah.
the dream team pretty much. So.
Yeah,
But,
so if you want to support me, feel free. If you want to support me through the outlet, feel free. It all hits me eventually anyway. As long as you decide that my words are worth your cash, I appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah, and I definitely think they are. And we really appreciate all the work that you do for the next Jeremiah. We'll have all of his articles that he's written on Agorist Nexus as well in the link. We'll have all that good stuff. And today's quote: "It's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled." Mark Twain. Agorist Nexus out.